King Charles III decided to put an end to the 540-year-old mystery of the disappeared princes. Over the centuries, the Tower of London has tried on more than one role. It was both a royal house and a place where cruel tortures took place. The Royal Mint was also located here. There was also a place for a royal menagerie within its walls. For many famous historical figures, the tower served as a place of detention. The future Queen Elizabeth I spent 2 long months in the tower after the suppression of Thomas Wyatt's rebellion in 1554. And already in the 20th century, the infamous gangsters, the Cray twins, were kept in the tower. But the most important secret of the old tower was and remains the story of the disappeared princes. In the tower, for 540 years, no one has been able to find out exactly what happened to the 2 young nephews of King Richard III. Background: Medieval England. The country is ruled by King Edward IV of the York dynasty, married to Elizabeth Woodville. After the death of the monarch, the crown should be transferred to the eldest of his 2 sons, Edward V. However, the late king's younger brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, declares that his brother Edward was never married to Elizabeth Woodville, which automatically reduces all his children to the level of bastards. According to the evidence that has come down to our days, all the time while the disputes for the crown continued, the young princes were imprisoned within the walls of the tower. Many saw how they entered the fortress, but there was not a single witness who happened to see how people came out of there. The rest of the story is well known to everyone. In 1483, the same Richard, Duke of Gloucester, took the throne, thus becoming King Richard III. Almost 200 years later, in 1674, already during the reign of Charles II of the Stuart dynasty, a box with remains belonging to children was found in the White Tower of the Tower of London, under the stairs not far from the chapel. It's no secret that children's skeletons were found in the tower both before and after this event. However, the remains of these children were dressed in half-rotted clothes made of velvet, a material that only members of the royal family and those close to them could afford to wear. In addition, the place where the box with the sad contents was found corresponded to the records of the historian Thomas More, where he described the last place of residence of the disappeared princes. The question of how impartial the documentary filmmaker himself was in his judgments remains open, because it's no secret that More grew up in the family of Richard III's sworn enemy and was a supporter of the Tudors. Either the half-rotted velvet made Charles to believe that the discovered remains really belonged to the missing princes, or the monarch's desire to put an end to the dispute over the fate of the royal offspring. But one way or another, Charles II ordered the discovered remains to be placed in an urn and buried in Westminster Abbey with all royal honors. From that moment on, any actions regarding the remains of members of the royal family could be carried out exclusively with the special permission. Since then and to this day, any attempts to study the found remains and get closer to the disclosure of the centuries-old mystery have been suppressed. The recently deceased Queen Elizabeth II was no exception, and only recently, the new King Charles III, a great lover of history and archaeology, supported the desire to solve the mystery of the disappeared princes. King Charles III has supported a project to test the DNA of bones buried in Westminster Abbey, and soon the public will be able to get an answer to the most important questionnaire: the 2 children's bodies found during the reign of Charles, to actually the remains of the missing princes. The premiere of a documentary film called The Missing Princes is expected to be released soon. A huge research work was carried out by the writer Philippa Langley, who in 2012 found the final resting place of King Richard III and the criminal lawyer Rob Rinder. The 90-minute film casts doubt on everything we think we know about this infamous incident from the past of the royal House of York, putting aside old myths and starting from scratch. These 2 people were able to obtain new scientifically sound data that will allow us to look differently at this centuries-old mystery. What can I tell you about already? During the work within the framework of this project, the researchers came to the conclusion that at least one of the princes remained alive. Most likely, the eldest of the boys, Edward, turned out to be the lucky one. It is assumed that he spent the rest of his life in the village of Coldridge, Devon, under an assumed name. Langley and Rinder believe that Richard III granted the life of one of Elizabeth Woodville's sons, in exchange for the former queen's promise to abandon all attempts to transfer the crown of England to one of her sons. The researchers came to such conclusions after a thorough analysis of all the circumstances under which Elizabeth Woodville recognized Richard III's right to the throne. Immediately after the Dowager Queen took the oath to the new monarch, a confidant of the king, Robert Markin Field, was sent to Coldridge, who accompanied a certain John Evans who arrived from nowhere. The monarch's favor has spread so far that he grants this unknown the position of manager of the Deer Park and several high, lucrative titles. A new resident of the village, not straitened in means, built a chapel in the local church of St. Matthew in 1511 at his own expense. Surprisingly, the chapel is literally overflowing with various royal symbols of the York dynasty. On the stained glass windows of the chapel, you can see the image of Edward V, who had been considered dead for many years by that time. There are only 2 such images in the world, and one of them adorns Canterbury Cathedral. This circumstance made the researchers wonder, what does this image do in a church in the countryside, and what is the connection between John Evans and Edward V? Scientists have suggested that the deposed king thus transmitted a message to his descendants, allowing them to reveal the secret of his disappearance. In addition, while studying the stained glass windows, other secret messages were discovered, such as a large crown decorated with deer for unknown reasons, as well as the symbols of the grandfather of the missing princess according to the tradition existing at that time. The image of the patron was created in churches built on personal donations. In the chapel in question, there is an image of the same John Evans. At the bottom of the portrait, the royal symbols of the House of York are clearly depicted, including the main symbol, the white rose, and the French heraldic lily, which was present on the coat of arms of England until 1603 and recalled the coronation of Edward III of England as King of France. Who but a member of the royal family could afford such a liberty? It is noteworthy that John Evans' gaze is directly directed at the image of Edward V, as if indicating an indissoluble connection between these 2 people. Comparing the 2 images from the stained glass windows of the chapel, the researchers really came to the conclusion that, most likely, some convey the facial features of the same person. Among other things, the project participants studied the tombstone of John Evans, on which one letter was omitted when writing the name instead of Evans. Evasion was engraved on the tombstone. Edward V rests in peace as below. You can see the word king written upside down.